Here on our business programs, we've been preaching the gospel of let the ATMs be filled, for a long time. So we're glad now that the operators themselves, the POS operators, AMPAN, their body there, they are taking some steps to ensure that their names are not, or their name is not tarnished, and all of that. So we'll see how that goes, talking about their task force to help ensure that members are doing business according to how they should do. Now, one of the stories we have our eyes on this afternoon is that story that Nigeria may have already or may be losing its leading sports as the biggest economy on the continent and going down to as much as number 4. Well, the major driver, according to Bloomberg, is the devaluation of the Naira. We spoke to Mr. Bismarck Rawani about this earlier today during Business Morning, and he did say that perhaps that was the status in December, but with the appreciation of the Naira, in the last few weeks, that may not be the status. But let's get another perspective to this. The Managing Director of No Sananke Solutions Limited, Mr. Femi Onokore. He's with us in the studio. Mr. Onokore, good afternoon, and thank you so much.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Us. Yeah. So, I don't know, what do you think about this? That Nigeria may at this point be the 4th biggest economy, losing our first, losing the second, losing even the 3rd?
Well, yeah, in all honesty, I would like to see the basis for that evaluation. As of last, this has been seen, Nigeria is still like maybe top 3 economy in Africa. But even if that were to be the case, with the appreciation of the Naira in recent times, I do not think that position holds true. Fundamentally, if we talk about GDP, in terms of GDP, and that's how I usually measure stuff, there are critical elements, that of the GDP projection of a country. You talk about consumption, you talk about government spending, you talk about investment and net exports. Regarding consumption, which is the biggest factor in the GDP projection, consumers' ability to spend, purchasing power of the Naira, critical issues. Inflation is one of the biggest issues on the table. Headline inflation has been increasing, right, which of course impacts negatively on consumers' ability to afford a lot of things. And food inflation is about 40% right now, which also constrains the ability of individuals, right? But in all ramification, the Q1 of this year, the country has performed reasonably well. Currency has appreciated. There's been commitment from the government in terms of government spending to stimulate productivity and growth.
Yeah, so, currency is appreciating. Now, we've seen it drop for, I think, the last 3 days. So I don't know what's going on. Was it a fluke? Are we going back to the appreciation, or is this stability we're looking at?
Yeah, from our previous discussion, I've always said that the important thing is not the figure. The important thing is to find a sweet spot, a balance, so as it were, that can be sustained, right? A stable position for businesses and investors to use as a benchmark for projection. The fact that it fell is an indication that prior to this point, there were disparities in the market in terms of the demand and supply end of the market. If the demand was as high as it allegedly was when it was selling at astronomical rates, then if the CBN is offering a lower rate, it means that whatever the CBN is offering will not be sufficient. The market will mop it up and the price will still continue to go high. As it is right now, the CBN is still trying to find the right spot, because fiscal policy will now be built on this. And it is on the basis of this that we can now properly tackle issues like inflation and other macroeconomic indicators in the economy.
So would you say that, a couple of days, even before the Naira stopped appreciating, this last few days, there was the conversation of Naira is gaining and yet inflation is still high. Prices haven't started dropping, even though now I think, because yesterday we saw the bag of rice, 50 kg, started tapering from about 90, 80 to about 75 and 60. Not pleasant at all, but how do we balance it now, talking about prices and the gain in the Naira? Because we see FCCPC also bringing up another side of the conversation, that perhaps
price gouging.
some Nigerians are exploiting
Others,
Nigerians,
yeah.
consumers.
That's price gouging, and this FCCPC is trying to do a bit of it. They sent out a communication regarding helplines, so you can report. To. What you said earlier is very interesting. It comes down to inflation. So we need to first understand the kind of inflation that that operates in the mix. There's a demand pull kind of inflation, which is there's a lot of demand, but there's few supply. So naturally, supplier will increase its price. There's cost push, which means the cost of production has increased, right? Which naturally the supplier still wants to make his profit, is going to push that in. And there is money supply variation. There are other things that are also elements of that, like increase in wages, devaluation of the currency, as you said. In our own case, the Nigerian system is a bit peculiar, and that's why I think we should have a bit more patience with the fiscal policy managers, the monetary policy managers. Inflation in Nigeria, the demand hand is fuzzy. So we talked about the denomination of the Naira and how changes in prices do not follow the decimal position. It jumps in absolute terms. So things, if you have an increase in price, but like maybe overall cost increase of 5 Naira, by the time it gets to the consumer, instead of spreading across the volume of the product, it adds 10 Naira, which does not make any sense in terms of cost push. But the bottom line is that the consumption, which is the price, spending power of the consumer, has been reduced, irrespective of the actual cost push element that supposedly drove the price up. You are going to have an increase from 70 Naira to 100 Naira for a good that actually the cost push end of it is only increased by maybe like 5 Naira or 2 Naira. Why? Because we don't have smaller notes, for example. Because people will say that it's hard to get change. Stuff like that are artificially contrived. Then there's the other part of people exploiting others. In Nigeria, I found that it is very popular. Blame the government, say this political party is bad, this person is horrible, this one doesn't know. And then you can almost get away with murder. That's a problem that we need to have reorientation, because it is not an isolated thing. If the country is good, it's good for all. If the country is bad, it's bad for all. The exploitative tendencies of middlemen and traders also need to be, contained. If the value of the currency before was being used as an excuse for increased prices, if the currency has gone down, what has happened to the cost push part of it? Then it shouldn't really be a factor again. What is creating the continued inflationary thing? You can't say that it's restocking cost that's creating the problem. You couldn't have restocked for 3 months since January, and that's the reason you are. Do you understand? So there are several elements in it. It will take a while to sanitize the system. The concentration.
But we're on the right track from your perspective.
Exactly. That's what I feel. I believe that the fact that we are understanding the problems that we have groomed over time, and we have all accepted as truisms until some of the debunking came along, we have an expectation that things are going to get bad. And right now, a lot of people are still quite skeptical when it was appreciated, like, oh, is this a fluke? How is this happening? What's going on?
So do you see us going back to the appreciating of the Naira?
For me, it's not so much the appreciation or the devaluation at this point. In our model that we designed for the Nigerian ecosystem, what we are looking at, and that's how we're evaluating the CBN's policy changes, monetary policy changes, and fiscal policy from the Ministry of Finance. What we anticipate is that government spending and productivity measures, how are they pushing forward on it? How quickly will they be implemented? How quickly can we start seeing results? We can make projections in terms of inflation will drop to sub 30 and all that. But if we're not seeing the actual impact of currency appreciation in consumer spending, if we're not seeing increased productivity and availability of power, for example, we're supposed to have like 30, megawatts, and we're doing like 6. And projection is for by 2030 we should have 30, and 2024 we still have just 6. That's always going to affect production. It means that local manufacturers are going to depend on diesel and alternative energy sources to power, which goes into the cost push element again and drives up inflation, even further. So it is those mix that really should be of concern. Once we find that stable point, in terms of what the value of the currency is as against external currencies, and in terms of our consumption and the ability of the Naira to make purchases. We have alternatives to a lot of things we import. Then we can now start holistically assessing the direction that the economy is going.
What do you see as the fair value of the Naira at this point?
Whoa, that's a tough one. It's something that we've been grappling with for a bit in the office. We have a lot of back and forth regarding it. We don't have enough information. That's the honest truth. Is the dynamics of the market. We don't have enough. We can make projections. We can say it will go lower, it can go higher. But what is the fair value? The fair value of the Naira is going to is a derivative of a lot of elements within the economy. Right? What are your import receipts? Right? What are the alternatives that you have? What are your export receipts? Those things affect the value of the Naira. What's the monetary policy position of the CBN? Right? What's our money supply, index? Those are the issues that we need to address. Once we have those, and it's really still fuzzy for a lot of people. When the CBN started on the reforms, we couldn't see a lot of changes or movement until the appreciation, started. In fact, some people were making claims that it's artificial. But when it became sustained over a while, a lot of naysayers.
But the test is here. The Naira started dropping. The test is here. So I mean, let's see if it's artificial or not.
This is how it should be. We should have a band, a spectrum of possible fluctuation. It's not as if it's always going to go on a lower trajectory. If the demand and the market resists it, right, definitely the Naira will devalue to the proper
because the
rate.
NAFTA still yesterday had scarcity of liquidity.
Exactly.
Yesterday at the close of trade. So, but anyway, our CBN governor will be back from Washington, and and he will continue where he stopped.
No,
so I think they've done a lot of talking there.
Yeah.
Even though the Minister of Finance had told us from Washington that they were going to get financiers, to some of the reforms and their plans. So,
yeah, like we said about the GDP, investment is a key element in GDP. I mean, what's it called? GDP position. Fiscal policy needs to drive investment and comfort in the economy. As it were now, we've spoken with a couple of investors who are a lot more comfortable with the balance in terms of the FX position. Now, the other concern they will have is repatriation. CBN has cleared obligations, a backlog of obligations, so that also gives some comfort. Can this be sustained? Our reserves are okay, fine, some appreciation and additions, right? It will settle receipts, it will reduce. Crude oil sales price is pretty okay, so it means that we have more inflow in terms of, so there's so many things to look at and just find a holistic middle point.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Femi Onakunre, Managing Director of Nusananke Solutions Limited. Certainly, Nigeria's economy is an interesting topic at any time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
All right.